Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Keith Rayner, Ultiworld senior editor. And we're freshly back from Richmond, Virginia, Keith, where we were at the High School National Invite 31, not quite 32, of the best teams in the country coming together for the first time this tournament's been held since 2019 due to the pandemic. Keith, first of all, I'm trying to remember, were you at the 2019 event?
I was.
Okay. So you've seen this event kind of evolve over time. I want to get your personal review of this year's tournament.
Well, Charlie, it is great seeing the tournament evolve over time, as you know, both there have been structural changes to how it's run on the back end, but I think perhaps the most important thing is the breadth of teams participating. You know, getting really the top level teams to be in the field to compete against one another, because I know for a lot of these players and fans, that's what they want to see. Is they want to see these top teams going up against one another as a showcase of the type of young talent that exists in Ultimate.
Yeah, and I it was really nice this year. We had a stadium, like a relatively small set of stands, but it had a press box and a scoreboard and, music. And it was just so fun. It was so fun. I had a great time just being at the event. And it seemed like the kids were having a great time. And we saw some very good, impressive Ultimate from high school teams. I feel like every time I watch the teams, I'm more impressed by the quality of play. A lot of U20 players in the field, as you might expect. And, we'll talk about the competition in a moment. But I do want to note that, it's cool to see people willing to take the trip, across the country to play in this event. And I think there's very clearly a market for the top teams, who many of which, dominate their local state competition, for example, to then be able to go up and test themselves against the best teams in the country. So at the end of the day, Keith, we get to the semifinals on Saturday, and it's all West Coast teams, heavily dominated by Utah and Seattle. South Eugene girls team just crushing everybody throughout the entire event. And we'll get to them. But I have to say, the one biggest takeaway I have from this weekend is that the West Coast high school Ultimate scene is it's just simply better than what we're seeing on the East Coast, even from really strong areas like the Triangle.
Very, very impressive stuff. There's no way to argue for it. I actually was talking to a parent from one of the East Coast teams, and they're like, well, it looks like having it here in Richmond didn't really negatively impact all those West Coast teams, so might as well keep it out here, right? So I can follow that logic, because it was a West Coast heavy affair. Some of that I imagine you could kind of chalk up to just the natural ebbs and flows of talent in the general areas, but I also think that I spoke a lot with Lou Burris, who two of his kids play with South Eugene in the girls division. And so he was there, and we talked about, the impact that the pandemic had on Youth Ultimate, and in particular girls division teams. And, part of it, I think, is that places with the infrastructure to survive and or maintain and thrive through that period, we're the best positioned to do well here. And I think if you look at, having a lot of Seattle area teams, having teams from Utah do really well, I think that kind of speaks to, the community infrastructure that exists to help support those teams. But maybe you make a counter argument, and when you look at how the North Carolina teams in the boys division did, because we didn't have any North Carolina teams in the girls division, but they didn't perform as well, and obviously they have a really strong community with great support. So take it or leave it. But I do think it's an interesting theory.
So in the semifinals, South Eugene out of Oregon taking on Ingram out of Seattle. And then it was an all Seattle semifinal on the other side, Lincoln and Roosevelt. And that may have been the game of the tournament in the girls division. 14-12 win for Lincoln, an upset over Roosevelt, who had mostly beaten them all season long up in Washington, including in state championships. And so a huge victory for Lincoln to get to the final, where they were easily dispatched by a South Eugene team that looks like one of the best high school teams that we've seen come through the division maybe ever. Like I know it's always easy to say that, but like I really truly think that's possible.
They were one of the most dominant outfits. Certainly, I shouldn't say one of. They were the most dominant outfit we've seen at high school national invite. That's for sure. I mean, they were fast, skilled, deep, united. Like they had a clear plan. That was a really talented team beyond just the top level names. I mean, they were getting a lot of different people involved, and people were stepping up in different games. You know, Dave Kokler had a fantastic final, just a sophomore, but isn't necessarily someone that we had on our radar coming into the tournament, when there are big names on the team like a Callahan or Elsa Waybright. So, really impressive showing by South Eugene.
And, you know, I think the interesting thing about South Eugene, you know, you talk about dominance. I mean, they never allowed more than 7 goals in a game, and pretty much consistently got to 15 because their offense would just go on the field and score almost every time. Like I think maybe Lincoln got 1 break in the final, looking back, but there just were not a lot of breaks to be had against this offensive line. And I mean, they didn't even break a sweat during pool play. So
well, they're barely out there in pool play. It was the defense was out there over and over and over, just thumping teams.
That's a good point. I mean, their pool play games were 15-1, 15-2, 15-1. And that's against some of the best teams on the East Coast. Madison, Virginia State champions, Lexington, second place finisher in Massachusetts, you know, very good scene up there. They were on another playing field.
They certainly were. And they deserve all the credit for delivering. And there's plenty of youth on that team. I mean, this may not be the last that we're talking about South Eugene dominating the girls division. This is something that could be a staple.
So I want to share a couple quick notes before we talk about the boys division about the tournament itself. As much as the parent that you talk to wishes that the tournament would remain in Virginia, make it nice and convenient for those area teams to come to the event, the HSNI is going to be moving around the country on a 3-year cycle. So next year, we're very likely to be somewhere on the West Coast. And, you know, should make it possible for more of the teams out there, teams from California, you know, more teams from the Pacific Northwest to attend. And then we'll be back in the Midwest or somewhere in the central United States in the future. I'm hoping to have the tournament in Denver at some point, or Denver area, because I just think that there's a great burgeoning Colorado scene, and I would love to get a chance to see how some of those teams in the, let's call it the Mountain West generally, and Texas could stack up with the powerhouse programs from the coasts. And also planning next year to implement an algorithm and basically have a collection of where all youth scores get submitted for kind of like keeping a standardized objective ranking of teams. It's been a real challenge for literally for years to even just simply find score results from a lot of high school tournaments, because some of them are on USAU, some of them are on scoreport.net, some of them are on random Google Docs, and some of them just are not kept anywhere. They're just in email.
They're on some piece of cardboard. They're on the back of a pizza box at the Tourney Central.
So we're going to try to create a more systematized ranking system that uses an objective component in order to have like a way of ranking teams, which can be difficult because of regional bubbles and things like that. Final thing, Keith, at least the champions are going to get an auto bid to next year's high school national invite. And it may extend to the finalists, more to be decided still and later announced. But I thought I'd just share that here on the podcast.
Those are good changes, or good updates, I guess I should say. Some of them not changes; they're just the plan continuing. But I think one of the things that is unique about the tournament itself is that it's on Friday and Saturday, and the finals are played under the lights on Saturday. And the people I've talked to have said, like, this is the way, is nighttime final. Like, this is the thing we need to have. It wasn't great for our cameras necessarily, but it was great for the atmosphere. People enjoy it. There's just something about playing in the evening under the lights that makes an event feel special, particularly a competitive athletic event. And, I certainly look forward to more of that and hope that as these young players, organizers, parents like see this and enjoy it, they're like, we should try to find ways to implement this elsewhere, even if it has to be a Sunday night final or something.
I mean, you can't accuse me of not putting my money where my mouth is, Keith. we managed to get the Utah teams involved, and it's just so great to talk to all the Lone Peak parents. And I hope we see more Utah teams out next year when we're on the West Coast. To be able to compete across an entire event. And their boys team won the tournament. And this has been one of the premier programs in the country for multiple seasons. So it's just great to be able to include them. And yeah, like Saturday night, staggered finals with no consolation games happening. It's fun. It's really fun. I don't like that. That is what the rest of the sport needs to be trending towards. And that includes USA Ultimate's big tournaments. I mean, I really think it should be a priority to figure out how to not have games happening in the middle of the day on Sundays and Mondays. It just sucks.
It's not as fun. It's tricky, having the tournament on Friday and Saturday. Like, you have to give something up. And that is, playing earlier, like having having Friday play for us is the trade-off. That probably means teams have to travel on Thursdays, and maybe that means they're taking more time off on that end instead of on the back end of the tournament. So it's a trade-off. We're cognizant of that, and that may not work in all situations, but certainly for big 3 and 4 day tournaments, you have more room to play with.
It's nice to have the extra weekend day to travel, though, and it's a lot cheaper to fly Sunday mornings than it is to fly Sunday nights when the business travelers are also buying tickets. So there's positive trade-offs on that side too, though I fully acknowledge that it requires an extra day off of school and work for players and coaches respectively, and we'll always continue to listen to the feedback from teams about their thoughts on the scheduling, et cetera. So let's talk about the boys division. Lone Peak getting the win over Hale Waldorf, the top 2 teams in the power rankings, and end up meeting in the final. They really looked like the best teams all weekend long. Kind of ID'd them as the top 2, likely favorites to get to the championship after games on Friday. And then they made it, Keith. We got some really exciting games along the way. Hale versus Eastside Prep, a kind of a rematch of Washington State play from back in the fall, was a great semifinal. We saw Jordan and Lincoln play an absolute barn burner in the quarterfinals. That game was filmed, so I highly recommend checking that one out. And then Lone Peak, really just extremely impressive offense. And I mean, how much more can you say about this team and what we're seeing from the Utah scene in general? The development of fearless players, fully committed to a system. Like, that team looked better than some college teams at college nationals. Maybe not D1, but D3, yes. Like, I'm not really exaggerating when I say that. Like, some incredibly impressive throwing. And I mean, I thought that we saw real quality from Hale and Lone Peak, where it's like legitimately high level offenses, very different style of offenses, but some players we're going to be talking about for a long time to come.
It's interesting environment. For Lone Peak, for the Utah teams. I had a chance to talk with some folks from Lone Peak throughout the tournament and after their win. And, so many of these players are going to kind of leave Ultimate for some number of years. In some ways, some folks have even said they just forget about Ultimate because so many of them go on their missions. So, whether or not they return and join, a program in college or whatnot is TBD for so many of them. And so, we'll see what happens with Club in that area or the Salt Lake Shred as opportunities for those players to be showcased. But as it stands, like Lone Peak and the Utah youth scenes are the best opportunity for these players to really be showcased. And so I know, it's very meaningful for them to be on a big stage, and they played that way. They played like it really mattered to them. And an impressive level of execution on both sides of the disc. They really made Nathaniel Waldorf star Declan Miller, who had kind of run rampant through most of the tournament. They made him work harder than any team I had seen all weekend. I put a lot of pressure on the other Nathaniel players. Some of them really stepped up. The Hines brothers, Ocean and Cedar, both made some really big plays in that game, but it put a lot of pressure on them with Declan being forced to work so hard by that Nathan Hale defense. And then they just didn't give up a lot of break chances. They were extremely efficient when they generated break chances. They very rarely, I think they had maybe 2 break chances they didn't convert, which is pretty crazy for a team of 15, 16, 17, 18 year olds. This wasn't like some senior laden, we've been playing years together team. There are players on that team who were sophomores who were involved in play. They've played together a lot, but that's very impressive for a team this young to be so efficient with the disc and while also simultaneously making big plays. They were making difficult plays. They were throwing hammers, deep shots, skies like that. It was a pretty exciting final. I would also say that there was something to be said for some of the parity in the boys division that I think led to, those two did feel like the best 2 teams, but it felt like those teams could have lost along the way, even if they were better. Obviously, a real test for the Whales in semifinals from Eastside, but they got pushed in other places. Even Lone Peak, who won all of their games pretty comfortably by the end, they had tough halves. They had halves where they were neck and neck with teams. So to me, that speaks to some of the parity in the boys division in particular. While we had to wait for the top seeds to really get together in the girls division to see some of that parity in South Eugene was just so far and away so good that nobody could really keep up.
I mean, St. Louis Park put a pretty good game on Hale in pool play. Mm-hmm. I have to say, I'm going to tip my cap to the U20 coaching staff because many of the most impressive players I saw this weekend are U20 players. Whether you talk about Ocean Hines, I can't wait to watch that guy pulling on the starting D line for U20 team. I mean, that seems like an obvious thing. I mean, he's one of the best pullers that I've watched in a while, regardless of division. Really very technically sound 360 pulls on the backhand side. Adam Grossberg was very impressive. Tobias Brooks for Jordan, excellent. I know that team disappointed not to get to semifinals. You already mentioned Declan Miller. How about Everett Saunders, who was just unstoppable in the final, just throwing dimes right and left, Keith.
A fantastic performance as the leader of that team. I mean, I think he threw 5 of their 6 breaks were assists from him. He had to match up with Miller. They rotated different players with Miller, but he was often being guarded by Miller when he was out there on offense. Everett Saunders was fantastic. I still remember him as a little pipsqueak freshman getting handler reps the first time that I watched this Lone Peak team play in, I think, 2018. And now, he's grown up strong and playing with a lot of fearlessness.
Well, anyway, overall, very, very fun event. West Coast upgrades in future seasons in the power rankings. I think you have to assume that even a team like in the boys division, South Eugene also attended, and they go 1-2 in pool play, a tough pool with the 4 and 5 seeds Lincoln and Wissahickon, along with Carolina Friends. But they get a win over St. Louis Park. which I think is a very notable crossover win for the West Coast. Like kind of not the best West Coast team against not the best Minnesota team, and they get the win there. South Eugene gets rolled by Lone Peak, but they end up taking the win over Jordan in the 5th place game. So that don't make too much of consolation. A lot of teams are opening up the bench to get the kids some run, but still impressive performance for South Eugene. And I think it means that all those teams out west, California, Oregon, Washington, Utah, maybe even Colorado, they're going up next season in the power rankings.
And I mean, there's really nowhere more to go for the Seattle teams in the girls division for those Pacific Northwest teams. They're already at the top, but maybe you're looking down the line. A team that finishes 5th or 6th at the Seattle Invite or in Seattle States, or the 2nd or 3rd place teams in the state of Oregon. Maybe you're starting to look at them as teams that are in the teens or in the early 20s or whatnot in the power rankings. That's how you see that stuff take place, even if those top teams were already at the top.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the PUL Championship Weekend coming up this weekend with a little preview. We are also going to check in on the AUDL in our subscriber bonus segment as we kind of take a look at where things stand in the season, who are the credible championship contenders, who could win a title. Make sure you become a subscriber. It costs less than $4 a month. You can go to ultiworld.com/subscribe to sign up. And we will also check in about who won the Callahan Award. We haven't talked about it yet. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Deep Look. Well, we haven't really talked yet, Keith, on the show about the Callahan Award winners this year. Don Colton from UNC, John Randolph from Brown, getting the Callahan Award wins during semifinals of the D1 College Championships. I don't think either of these is much of a surprise, Keith. I think pretty clearly the odds-on favorite in both divisions, and feels like very deserving wins for both players.
I agree with that. Not a big shock, although I do think it's interesting. Last year, Aziz Adiemi wins for Brown, and then Brown goes back to back. But more notably, then you have Don Colton winning this year. D-line is in, baby. People like defense. I really feel like it would have been hard to win this award, to be a prominent player as a defense first player. I mean, even look at Jasmine Childress, who was playing O-line, I think, really in her final season with UC Santa Barbara, but I would say is known as a defensive first player. So, you're starting to see, I think, a little more recognition, a little more love for being able to play great defense, which was something that wasn't necessarily around before. Look, defense also shows up great on the highlight reel. It looks good. Playing boring offense, not cool. Everybody's running these dominator sets. Like, there's not a lot of great tape from that. But if you go out there getting blocks, people like that. It looks good.
People do like that. People very much like that. I'm trying to go back through and think about, when's the last time we saw back-to-back winners from the same school? In the women's division, Courtney Kiso and Georgia Bosher both went to Wisconsin.
Pretty deserving.
Wins in 2008 and 2009. Yes, incredibly talented players. In the men's division, you got to go back to 99 and 2000. Do you know, Keith, who it was and what school?
99 and 2000. No, I not off the top of my head. No.
Okay,
is it Brown?
First in, it's Brown.
Is it Justin Safdie and Forch?
Yes, it is.
Wow. Did it without looking.
Love that. So Brown now the only school to go back to back, and they've done it twice in the men's division.
I think they have 5 total Callahan winners. I think.
Brown also, yes, because Zip won in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting run. So now let me give you this. The last time in the men's division that the winner of the award won the championship in the same year is 2014 Jimmy Mickle. No, wait a minute. I think Nutt won in 15, right? UNC won in 15. Yeah, because it was the year after they lost to that Colorado team in the final. So in 2015, Jonathan Nethercutt wins the Callahan and the championship. But since then, it's they haven't won. Trent Dillon in 16 with Pittsburgh, John Stubbs, Harvard 2017. I mean, the team that year wasn't even any good. Gabe Hernandez for Stanford in 2018. Gucho Hannes for UNC in 2019 when they lost to Brown. Michael Ing in 2020. Obviously, there was no tournament. Aziz, they lose in semis in 2021. And JR loses in the final to UNC to perhaps his most obvious rival and the player of which he's been compared against for his entire college career, Liam Searles-Bose.
I've heard it referred to as the Callahan curse. I mean, I heard whispers of it at nationals this year. I still am not sure I give it much credence, but it's not a great trend. I'd be a little nervous, Yeah, if they were going to give it to me at semifinal and I still had to play semifinals, like I hadn't played, I might be like, I appreciate that, but like, can you put a pin in it? Like, give it to me after semifinals.
I think in the women's division, well, obviously Don Colton wins both the award and the title. Before that, it was 2017 Angela Zhu for Dartmouth. But it's been a little slim pickings in the women's division too. Not always combining the Callahan win with the championship. So interesting note there. The PUL Championship Weekend is coming up this weekend and will feature the following 4 teams. Revolution out of Medellin, undefeated. They will not be the 1 seed. We'll talk about that in a second. The Raleigh Radiance, the DC Shadow, and the Indy Red. Well, if you're wondering why it's not the Milwaukee Monarchs and it's the Indy Red after Milwaukee won the division, Milwaukee declined their spot. So maybe we should talk about that a little bit first, Keith. But no, let's get the matchups first. It's going to be DC taking on Indy and Revo taking on Raleigh. Now, the reason that the undefeated Revolution, who beat both DC and Raleigh during the regular season, are not seeded number 1, is that they used the USAU modified algorithm to just rank the teams. And DC had some big blowout wins during the season that are, I would say, artificially pushing them up the board, because I don't think anybody who looks at this would think that DC should be seeded number 1. I mean, it's just impossible to think that that makes any sense.
It's very weird. Look, there's no way around it. It's what's going on is odd. I mean, there was already like schedule imbalances, and so I think people had hesitancy around the way that the bids were being given out. Anyway, I've gone on record as being like, okay, teams got their shot, but it's super odd for DC, who has losses to the teams behind them, to then somehow get the number 1 seed. Someone said that DC lost their way to number 1 to me, and that's not great. Now,
and what makes it worse, Keith, is that they're going to get a very comfortable, easy win in semifinals, while the 2 best teams in the league have to fight it out in semifinals in a war. And I just think it's totally unfair, and I don't understand why the decision was made not to look at head-to-head first. It's a total blunder.
Well, again, if I'm going to make the counter argument here, the algorithm takes into account these various factors, right, and looks at your margin of victory. I mean, it places a lot more importance on your margin of victory and who you are having that margin of victory against. So, the statement that the Premier ultimately put out, kind of like laying out the background of their reasoning for the seeding, points to some of the results that mattered, that had an impact on this. You look at Revo beating the Gridlock by 2, or Revo, they kind of laid out Atlanta and the night shape, and I don't know what their expected scores in the algorithm are supposed to be in those games. So there's kind of this every point matters kind of thing, but the teams kind of knew that going in, but I don't think they knew that to this degree necessarily. That they knew that every single point could have an impact on your seeding in this way if you won the division. So that lack of clarity is something that I think the teams can certainly quibble with, and fans.
There's been very little clarity about how things are playing out this season in the PUL in terms of schedule and who's even winning games. Here is the issue that I have. Okay. I have no problem with the algorithm. I mean, what else are you going to do with imbalanced schedules and teams not playing, sort of like a normalized group of teams? You have to choose something in order to create some kind of ranking. So I have no problem with the algorithm. Zero. None. My problem is that they didn't use head-to-head first, which is the most obvious thing to use in a seeding situation, particularly when you're talking about a very small sample size of games, over which an algorithm is going to struggle a little bit to sort teams.
And I think
that's my issue. I think anybody with any sense is going to rank these teams the same way.
I think
Revo number 1, Raleigh number 2, DC number 3, Indy number 4. You don't need to have you don't need a system to rank these teams.
If you sit down and like ask yourselves from either we emphasize head to head or we prioritize the rankings. If you sat down and like, okay, what's the worst case scenario if we do these things? And then you say, okay, the worst case scenario when we emphasize the rankings is this. And the worst case scenario when we emphasize the head to head is much less problematic. Like people will understand it. So
like, they lost to that team and like they didn't have half their O-line. Well, that's on them for not showing up with their O-line.
I also can't help but look at, I get why Indy is in based on record. But it's funny because the algorithm is putting DC ahead of Revo and Radiant. So like it feels important. But then you look at the algorithm and Indy is the third to last team in the whole league in algorithm ranking. They're behind Austin. They're behind Columbus. They're behind Minnesota. So like, it's just odd.
I mean, but that's the thing. They use record first to do the decision about who wins the divisions. But then the algorithm completely takes over for seeding the finals. I don't get it. But okay, so hang on. Let's talk about Indy being in because Milwaukee was supposed to be the team in. Now, I've spoken to multiple people about this at this point. The basic story that I think is accurate to share here, and there's going to be an article out about this as well, is that players were, because we remember the Monarchs situation with rostering a player who'd been accused of sexual assault, was later determined to have committed sexual assault by USA Ultimate, banned for 4 years, and that this has been ongoing with the Monarchs since last year. They were considering rostering them for this season, and then there were some players pushing back against that, and that so there's like a big internal investigation in the PUL into this situation. But Milwaukee was trying to move forward from this, acknowledging that they had made some missteps along the way, but players were getting, I think, very uncomfortable or tired of being attacked on social media for playing for the Monarchs. And so enough players declined to participate in the championship weekend for, certainly for various reasons. Some people had work commitments or other personal things going on that would have impacted their ability to play anyway. But broadly, the story is that people were just tired of it. They were tired of feeling like they were continuing to be attacked for the same issue over and over, and that like their association with the team was somehow making them guilty by association. And we can go into the details of whether that's fair or not, but that's the reason that Milwaukee isn't going to be there. They pulled out and decided that they didn't have enough players to compete for the weekend. And I've talked to multiple people who are sort of like just totally burned out on the entire season because of this issue for one reason or another. So, Keith, your thoughts?
Wow, that's obviously a bad situation for the league. I mean, to be in a position where teams are declining to come to your championship tournament, like there's no way to paint that positively for the league, right? It means that the league and the organizations within it don't necessarily have a great relationship with the public, with their fan base, with their potential fans. So it's, a continuation of what has been a real sore spot for the league this season is this entire situation with the Monarchs and how the league has dealt with it or the decisions that have been made since then. And it's created all sorts of ripple effect problems. We haven't even talked about the fact that the Red get into championship weekend based on their record, right? Well, they went 2-2. They played 2 fewer games than anybody else, or than the teams they were being compared to in their division. One of those games was a rain out. It happens. The other game was against Milwaukee, and that game was forfeited. So, and that was also a continuation of the issues that are at play here. Those are both games, I think you would say that the 2 games, both the rain out and this game, are games that, like, I don't think Indy would have been favored to win.
No, they would have been 5-point underdogs.
Those are teams that both algorithmically rank ahead of Indy. So, it's an odd situation for Indy to kind of benefit. It's not their fault. It's not like they did something wrong per se in accepting their invite or finishing 2-2, but it is an oddity that is hard to reconcile. And it's just another component of everything that makes this kind of pre-championship weekend a bit strange.
So Indianapolis, before their game against Milwaukee, released a public statement against the rules of the PUL that sort of condemned the Monarchs. Now, that public statement has actually now been deleted from their website. But they were kind of bringing up this situation that the Monarchs were dealing with in terms of considering rostering the player who was found to have committed sexual assault by USA Ultimate. So Indy said that they were going to decline to participate in pre- and post-game ceremonies and remain in the locker room until gameplay begun, wear green in support of mental health and trauma, and play with 6 athletes on the field during the first point of the game, meant to show solidarity for the survivor and those who cannot be there due to the Monarch Board's decision. So again, they deleted the statement. The Monarchs ultimately decided not to go play that game for similar reasons to those that they're not going to go to championship weekend. And then there's been a back and forth about whether that game should be a cancellation or a forfeit by the Monarchs, because the league told Indy that they were not to release a public statement. They did so anyway. The PUL then retweeted the statement from Indy. And so it has really just been a bumpy time. I believe that the PUL was in the process of considering whether or not to, because Indy appealed and said it should be called a forfeit after the league initially determined that it should be a cancellation and it just shouldn't count. And so the league was in the process of determining whether it should be a forfeit by Milwaukee when Milwaukee decided to just back out. So anyway, it's been a tough season for the PUL. I mean, I just don't know what else to say about it. Like, when you have teams sort of like openly fighting with each other in public statements online, that is not a good situation for a sports league to be in. And it kind of like found its way all the way to championship weekend. And here we are.
But you know what, Charlie? I seem to remember another fledgling Ultimate League that once upon a time had teams openly fighting with each other. That's leading to the genesis of Ultiworld. And look at that league. I think many people would say is thriving today. I mean, don't forget that AUDL teams were literally suing each other.
Yes.
Back in their early days. So, this is not totally unprecedented. And maybe it's part of the growing pains of starting a sports league. So, it's not all doom and gloom. This is stuff that other leagues have survived and moved away from over time. So there's obviously championship weekend. I shared the sentiments last time. I hope that they can close with something that's really exciting and celebratory and that people can rally around. There are some great teams in the field. Perhaps Red can surprise us. To their credit, the wins that they have, they beat Minnesota in a really a competitive game where they were the better team. They played better in that environment. And then they gave the Torch a great game. And those are solid teams. The Torch and the Striker are solid teams. So, Red is getting a chance to play on a really big stage here, and perhaps they could surprise. We've seen nobody was given the Soul a chance back in 2019. Nobody gave them a shot, and look, they forced double overtime. So we'll see what happens once the die are cast. But if we get a great championship weekend, do you think that can make this all look back and people think about that instead of the obstacles that the league encountered throughout the second season?
To an extent, yes. From a public side, I think so. But I think that there's very clearly internal issues that need to be addressed. Like the basic task of operating a professional league requires you to, publicize scores and schedules and standings and just really basic stuff. Like I don't think that I understand the difficulty of trying to rebound after like multiple years of not being able to hold your league after having like a really successful first season. And then you have essentially a complete and total leadership changeover where all of the original founders of the league just tap out. And so then you have to then come in and try to make it work in a situation where you've had to be on hold for 2 years. And that's just so difficult. I mean, I've said it before, like the Western Ultimate League kind of just got to come in fresh start, boom. And the thing is, like, yes, championship weekend, it's probably going to be great. I mean, the Midwest team was always going to be weak. They were probably always going to lose in the first round. So the other three teams are awesome. We're going to get a great semifinal between Raleigh and Revo, and we're going to get a great final between, I would assume, DC and whoever wins that semi. And so, like, competition standpoint wise, which we're going to talk about in a moment, it's going to be great. There are major internal things that need to be addressed for next year in the PUL, regardless of how people remember the season, which hopefully will be for spectacular moments amongst these three teams, which are arguably the best in all of women's semi-pro.
I'm with you.
Seattle maybe will disagree with me, but
is that our solution? Let's just invite Seattle. Like, you got this extra slot.
The Super Bowl WUL versus PUL championship, Seattle versus whoever comes out of PUL. Come on, this is how the big pro leagues got started.
Let's go. We've solved it. Hey, invite South Eugene Gender Diverse Ultimate. Like, let's do this.
Okay, Keith. So Indy versus DC. I'm going to set the line. Indy. Oh, well, let me give you DC. DC minus 7.5. Your thoughts on the matchup?
Charlie, I would say DC is a pretty heavy favorite. I know this is the deep analysis that people show up for. I mean, this is a team that's incredibly talented. I think Indy, what they've shown is that they're strong in, windy conditions, that they can be really successful in those environments. I think that was when I saw them playing their best. So, I think that there's something to be said for that, but I'm just not sure that Indy up and down the roster is going to have the athleticism to compete with DC. So I think if you watch, the backfield, how is DC's handler defense? How is that handling the situation? Because I think that's where they could really press their advantage, forcing Indy into reset situations and then just clamping down. That feels like a way to run away with the game and kind of push Red out in the beginning. If they let Red hang around, things could get interesting. So if we're sitting going through the first quarter and it's 4-3, 4-4 or whatnot, then I think you're opening the door. But if it's 6-1 at the end of the first, like I think you can start closing the curtains there.
Yeah, I just don't think that Indy's got enough talent on the roster to hang with this DC team that's just totally stacked. Yeah, we have like multiple Worlds players on DC. Indy, scrappy team. I think they outperformed my expectations this season. But at the end of the day, they're going up against a juggernaut team that would be probably a semifinalist at Club Nationals. And it's just, they're just not going to win the game. I'm sorry.
I mean, the Shadow just beat Rising, who in the algorithm is the fourth best team in the league, 22-6. I'm going to take the cover in the 7.5.
I think I am too. Maybe it's too shallow of a line.
I honestly thought you were going to open with like 10.5.
DC beat Milwaukee 18-5.
Yeah.
I mean, their defense is insane. Even New York didn't score 10 points against them. 11-4 DC over Minnesota. I mean, it's just like, you don't score on them.
I mean, I think your Indy team total is like 7.5, 8.
I think I take the under.
Right. Like,
depends on the pace, but yeah. Wow.
DC's damn good.
Okay, so let's talk about the rematch between Revo and Raleigh. Now, I was skeptical of this Revo team being able to come in and get all these wins in a very tough schedule environment when they came over to the U.S., but they passed the test with flying colors, and they really kind of soundly beat this Raleigh team that hasn't really looked quite the same since they lost Lindsay Sue. So, can they compete with this Revo team, given what you've seen this season, Keith?
Yes, they can. I do think that was like Revo's best effort. It was the thing that really sold me. I mean, to win that game in that fashion, their best result, I think, of the season, when it was right after playing these other two tough games. Very impressive on the part of Revo. But I think Radiance is going to be really well coached and well led. I expect to see a lot of quality adjustments. I think this is a team that's hyper focused on being successful in this environment. So I expect a classic between these two teams. I do think it's going to be a different tempo. It's going to feel different. I think Raleigh's going to be able to assert themselves much more and have a much better foothold on their second time through with Revo. So I'm looking forward to it. And I imagine we're going to be talking picks in a moment. What's the line here?
I think it's Revo minus 2.5.
Seems about right.
I think I take Raleigh. I really feel like we're going to get a very close game. I think that Raleigh's offense is going to play much better than it did in the first meeting. And we know that the coaching staff down there is going to be having looked at this tape for weeks, knowing that this matchup was coming again. And so I think that we'll see tighter rotations from Raleigh. And it will be a much more difficult test. And we saw the same thing play out with Revo back in 2019 at Championship Weekend when they had to go up against Atlanta. Not as good as Revo, but Atlanta took them to the brink. And I expect to see a similar story here. I will not be surprised if Raleigh wins. I will put it that way. I think they have the pieces and the talent to do it. But I do think that Revo should be considered a slight favorite. And I think I take Revo to win by like 1 to 2 goals. So Revo close is my pick.
I think another factor is that these college kids for Radiance, I think are going to be a little more prepared this time around. Yeah, they're going to be in a much better position when you're talking about Alex Barnett and Dawn Colton and Ellie Youngst back. I think that they're going to be in a better position to be more impactful and going to have a little more chance to go over the tape and prep for this specific matchup. So I also think I like Raleigh to cover, and I think I'm gonna, man, to lose the way they did at home is tough for me to like really flip the switch. How could I doubt? Sure. How could I doubt Revo after what they did on that road trip? I think I still gotta take Revo. So like I'm middling this one, I guess.
So you're taking Revo to win or to cover?
To win.
But not to cover?
Yeah. I'm counting on a classic here. I think this is going to look a lot like DC and Raleigh way back when. Was that week 2?
So we're both calling DC and the Revo to make the final. Who are you taking to win the championship, Keith?
Taking DC. I think they pull it off. I think they're going to benefit a lot from not having to go through a slugfest in semifinal. I also think that they will all, because they'll also have plenty of chance to make adjustments. Plus, really just playing the odds. I mean, if I think that semifinal between Raleigh and Revo is like a 55-45 kind of contest, it's just much smarter to pick DC. There's too much of a chance that they're not even playing against Revo in the final, in my eyes.
Sure. So what's the line? I'll let you set this one.
Let's see. What was the score the last time? Was Revo won that one 15-14? I mean, yeah, I don't see how you could make it more than a pick, really, based on that. I mean, maybe you say Revo -1.5, but I would probably throw this as a pick 'em.
Hard to argue with it. I'm gonna take the Revo repeat.
I figured. I think that's
they proved it to me. They proved it to me this season. They proved it to me. I mean, this assumes that they're traveling with a full roster. You know, like, we haven't seen rosters. So if they're missing a couple key pieces or something, then that maybe sways my pick, and I'll change it in Discord. But I just think that they've proven to be able to handle the turmoil of playing multiple games in a couple days and traveling and dealing with all that. So you're telling me that if they have a hard semi against Raleigh, they can't rally back on Sunday and win in a championship game?
It's a great point.
I think they can. So I'm taking Revo after doubting them earlier this year. I think, I picked them not to make the championship.
Look, we thought their road trip was really going to be a test, and we thought the league was going to be closer to them, but they looked
I thought that the rules were going to be different with the way that teams qualified to the playoffs. Anyway, this is going to be very exciting. I can't wait to watch the games.
I'm hopeful that we're going to get some classics. I mean, we've kind of waited the whole season for this. It's been clear who the best teams in the league have been after the first couple weeks. So this should be a pretty good show. Plus, you get all the worlds kind of implications. You may get some World Games matchups on the field. World Ultimate Club Championships around the corner too. I mean, there's going to be some international flavor that I guess comes with Revo Pro, but high level international competition.
Speaking of World Games, we would be remiss if we did not discuss Poultry Days, where, a party tournament, but both Team Canada and Team USA were in attendance to get some reps in, to get some playing time together, build some chemistry. They played in a showcase on Saturday night, and then they played again in the final on Sunday. Team USA beating Team Canada 15-10 in the showcase, and then losing in the final 9-5 or 9-4. I'll have to double check. The video will be available soon in the UltiWorld subscription if you're a full or plus subscriber. We hope you are, so you can check it out. The final was shortened due to rain, as a note, but Team Canada was dominant. Took half 8-4, and that included starting on defense. So a pretty interesting couple of results, Keith. I really did not expect to see Team Canada come out and get a win, and a decisive win like that over this Team USA roster.
A decisive one indeed is a bit of a surprise. I mean, we know Canada's talented. They could certainly be the second most favorite team in the field. I think a lot of people are probably looking at Colombia, but it really feels like it's Colombia and Canada vying for the top challenger slot. And I don't really think this changes that. It's essentially a couple preseason friendlies. So, I'm not worried about that necessarily. We've seen the U.S. lose to Colombia at World Games play and still win the tournament. I think that the U.S. team is going to gel a little bit over this time. And still, great sign for Canada. You got to be happy with that fact. This is going to be a talented team. They're not going to be intimidated by the U.S., and even less so now, which I think is something that could impact other teams down the line. Getting rid of that intimidation factor has a real tangible value in my eyes.
I agree. I think the confidence of knowing that you can beat them is important. It's worth noting this is really the first time that Team USA has been able to play together, because for some of their practice weekends, a bunch of players had to miss because of COVID. So, this is the first weekend they really get out there. And obviously they got a comfortable victory over Canada on Saturday. So going to be interesting to look at the tape, see what we see, and see if there are things to take away from these two matchups as we look ahead to the World Games, which are now about a month away. We are just about 1 month from the World Games. Super excited for that in Birmingham, Alabama.
Now, I have so many other Poultry Days related questions around these teams. Like, did both teams have to put somebody in the egg eating contest? And if they did, which country had a stronger egg eater?
I think that should be required.
Did they have to put somebody in the Poultry Days All-Star game with Miss Chick? We need to know these things.
Well, we should have had an embedded reporter, like somebody's got to go there, like nonstop updates from Team USA and Team Canada. Team Canada did not camp, I am told. So they didn't want to camp, so they didn't. And Team USA did camp. So I don't know if you want to account for that. It was kind of a rainy, drizzly, in some cases dreary weekend.
Not uncommon at Poultry Days,
Midwest,
unfortunately, at least in my experience.
Yes. Midwest in early summer. Classic. So anyway, looking forward to seeing the tape very soon. That is going to do it for this edition of Deep Look. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please join us for our subscriber bonus segment where we talk about the current state of the AUDL, where things stand in the standings, and which teams are credible championship contenders. All that in our sub bonus segment. For Keith Rayner, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long. And we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.